Welcome to Qualified Opinions, where we test the ideas and limits, the knowns and known unknowns around freedom and order in contemporary politics and society. We invite you to listen as we engage with leading and emerging thinkers across disciplines and issues who will sharpen our thinking on the topics shaping our discourse. Welcome back. Today's my great pleasure to welcome my friend Roger Bate. He is the president of the Center for Global Health and Accountability, and we're going to be talking about his great new book, The House Always Wins. Welcome, Roger.
It's great to be with you, Vera.
So we've been friends for a long, long time. Long time. Actually, in fact, you reminded me that we've been friends for longer than I even remember. I'm so old.
1992.
Yeah, it's been a long, long time. And I remember I met you because when you pointed this out, I remember that when I was like, a lone libertarian in France, sometime I would get invited to come to the UK to the Institute of Economic Affairs, which was like kind of like it felt to me like a piece of freedom, right? Escaping from France I was
escaping from Cambridge University. It felt the same.
Yeah. Cambridge been in the news a lot recently.
Oh yes,
and
I saw onto that topic if you want.
Yeah. No, I saw your writing. By the way, for listener, I really recommend Roger's Substack, which what is it called? It's like
I don't have a title.
It's exactly. That's what it's like. It's just Roger Bate.
Maybe I should give it a title.
You should give it a title. It's a little bit lame.
Yeah.
Like
okay.
Roger.
I am a bit lame. So
it is just. I mean, how do you have time to write like almost every day?
I write 2 or 3 times a week. I like it. It's fun,
no,
especially when there's a lot going on in the world.
I get it, but you had like fabulous pieces about Fauci, fabulous things about Cambridge. Fabulous health accountability and kind of ideas of reforms about global health and all of that stuff. It's just kind of like it's really, really, really worth reading because it's a perspective that we just really never hear on topics that actually should be way more at the center of public attention than a lot of the crap that people pay attention to. So
well, thank you. I like to work on stuff. It goes back to actually around the time where we met. That I think in the early 90s, we, as in conservative libertarian types, more broadly, felt like we'd won the key arguments. The Berlin Wall had fallen, capitalism had won, and so I looked at all of the kind of health and environment areas, which was still the strength, if you like, of the left. The watermelon is green on the outside, red on the inside. So I think that for me, we're having to re-win the battles that felt like they were won when we were students.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
And that's not going away,
unfortunately. But that I wanted to have you on to talk about your new book that was released on, I think, August 4th, The House Always Wins. But before we do, because this is a really interesting book about sport betting, and it is quite interesting. Like the last few books you've written on counterfactual, contrafeted drugs and things like this. It is kind of interesting to me to kind of see the shift in your career and your attention. I mean, it seemed like actually there's a natural progression. You were working on malaria and how when we were connected in the US, you had started this place called this nonprofit called Africa Fighting Malaria, where you were advocating for actually things that would be really useful at fighting malaria and actually think about trade-offs in how we fight malaria and balancing the environment, but also people's lives, which is kind of crazy to say. And now you seems to have kind of like it's evolved into kind of looking at, fake drugs and how, the kind of the dynamic of the nefarious side of betting, which is, a lot of you're looking, what's interesting to me, and this is why I think you're kind of one of the most interesting libertarian, classical liberal, whatever, of
Right.
the moment. It's like actually you're evolving in a space that makes us libertarian very uncomfortable.
I feel very uncomfortable often in my own space in the stuff that I work on. I mean, we'll get on to talk about the gambling thing in a minute, which was
But I
the
want to
most
understand
personal thing.
why,
Yeah,
how.
well, that is a slight except, but I've always been, as I said, from when I was a grad student, I've always wanted to work on issues where, because as I say, well, I felt we'd won the main battles. Economic policy was going to be, whatever we want, whatever we think of now of the Washington consensus, but generally the idea that free markets, capitalism would win, limited democracy. Yes, there are going to be flaws, and there are different types of democracies, but we won these battles. So I wanted to work in the areas where I felt that uh, the dirigistes were still on top, and so I worked on health and environment, and so I've always wanted to work on topics where the there were perceived wisdoms which were often not true, and here I think classical liberal economists should note that one of my great heroes growing up and working was, I met him only once, but was Ronald Coase, the Nobel laureate in economics, who basically won the Nobel Prize for two papers, Theory of the Firm and Theory of Social Cost.
That he wrote really early. I think he was in his early 20s, right?
That's right. The Theory of Social Cost was 60, but the Theory of the Firm was 37, 1937. He wrote that when I think he was a student, and that's what he won the Nobel Prize for. But for me, the key paper was, I can't remember the title, but it was to do with lighthouses in Britain. Everybody thinks of lighthouses as had to be provided by the state, because how on earth could you collect the money to actually run a lighthouse? Well, Coase, being stooping to empiricism, actually went and looked at records, and the ship captains had to pay a duty when they entered ports to cover the cost of the lighthouse. So what is perceived as a public good was being provided privately for hundreds of years. And that affected me possibly more than any other single paper, which was, why do we actually look and see what the market, in the broadest sense of that word, what the market is providing before we assume that the government needs to intervene? Where, there's the whole of welfare economics is about market failure. And it's like market failure, therefore government must, rather than the trade-off of what does the intervention cost? So I think I've always had that as an economic grounding.
And by the way, Coase, to say about how unbelievable Coase was, right? And Coase is also the guy who launched what now seems totally normal, which is to sell off the spectrum, the broadband, and
yes,
all of
and,
this.
and I think he was the editor of the Journal of Law and Economics for well over a decade. I mean, he had many roles in his academic and non-academic life. And as I said, I met him I think only like 6 months before he died, but it was one of my favorite days at the Institute of Economic Affairs. He came through, and I mentioned the Lighthouse paper and how it had affected me. And that was well over 30. I think that was 33 years ago, 30, maybe 30 more, 35. Anyway, so it affected me greatly. So I've always wanted to be, let's see what actually works. So when it comes to counterfeit medicines, it was, the perception was that if something, if the drugs industry tells you that it's dangerous to buy drugs online, that was what I believe to be true. And there are many problems of buying drugs online if you're not careful. But if you go to credentialed pharmacies based in the UK or France or Canada, you can buy cheaper drugs, which are actually of good quality. And that was I wrote 2 or 3 academic papers in like 2010, 11, which got me, people weren't very happy from the drugs industry because I was pointing out that actually you should do this. But at the same time, there are massive problems with substandard and counterfeit medicines. And I found a lot of the drugs, a lot of the anti-malarials in Africa, in some countries, 20 to 40% just simply didn't work. Sometimes they were fake. They had literally nothing in them of any quality. Other times they were just poorly produced, often after hours on the same production line. So I've always been interested in the impacts of kind of economic decisions on health. And the reason that I wrote The House Always Wins is mainly personal. It was a starting point. It was let go. There were many changes that took place in many people's lives in early COVID. And I was let go by the American Enterprise Institute. I've been a fellow there since 2002, but full-time from 2005 to 2020.
And you're the reason why I went there.
Well, and I'm sorry that didn't work out, but for neither of us, I was there longer, but in the end, and I'm not sure if I was clinically depressed, but I probably got quite close to it. And I've always loved sport. I feel like I'm an intelligent person. I follow sports. I competed in lots of different sports. I won't bore people with all of the things that I competed in, but I felt like I had above average chance. And this was also the time, the 2018 Supreme Court decision that allowed sports betting to come around. FanDuel and DraftKings and NGM and Caesars, all of these are now online. We have online mobile technology that makes this possible. So towards the end of mid 2020, I got sucked into the world of sports betting. And I was initially quite successful, which is often a very bad reality for many gamblers. And I lost quite a lot of money. And as I think for someone who likes writing, we were talking about that earlier, the therapy for me was, well, I should write about this. And one of the things was that, so we could talk about the detail, but I mentioned I was playing golf with someone. I mentioned that I just placed $100 bet on a tennis match. And he said, ridiculous. He said, and he told me about his son who had won $16,000 the night before on a football game. And I said, and then I turned to someone else. I was at the bar after a round of golf, and 7 of the 13 people, I think it was, at the bar had gambled within the last 24 hours. And most of them were losing. And from that, I got context. Someone said, you should speak to my son because he's making money on it, or you should speak to my son because he owes the book at his fraternity at college $1,000.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? And how this due to COVID and the Supreme Court decision, this what was a non-existent other outside of Atlantic City and Vegas, you couldn't do. Suddenly it was, we had nothing else to do in our lives, and more men than women when it comes to sports gambling, a lot of them got sucked in to do it, and it was great fun as long as you weren't losing a lot of money. But as we can talk about, I interviewed for this book. I interviewed quite a few people who lost an enormous amount.
So it's in the middle of the book, and you just have their first names, and it's sad, and it's just like, and it is the thing that's sad is like the losing become in a way the mechanism that keep them going in a weird way.
Yeah,
as much as the winning, it's like it compounds.
Well, that's the psychological part, and I am a well-trained economist with multiple degrees, but I'm not a psychologist, and so I can't claim to have real knowledge of that. But it really is fascinating that actually for people who gamble hundreds of times a day, winning becomes not less important, but it becomes less relevant.
Yeah,
you have a statistic. The losses.
You have a statistic in there. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's kind of crazy about like a casino, how many times the house wins versus.
Actually, and it varies across, but there are only like 2% of sports gamblers actually end up winning.
It's so.
It's very, very low.
It's very and they're all very
right? and they're usually they're the professionals.
So
they're
actually,
the people. Yeah.
I have a question for you because I remember when I moved to the U.S. reading the baseball book by George Will.
Right.
And I just couldn't understand. I've never revisited it. I actually truly enjoyed it.
Right.
But I remember in it, and I thought about it when I was reading your book, because in it, he talks about in baseball, they lose all the time. Like actually I can't remember. There was like
the best batters in baseball batting like 300, 350, which means that they're striking out or failing 2/3 of the time. The very best players.
And I thought about this when I was reading, and I don't know if it's connected at all, but I thought I did think about this, that they're in sports, right? There's just a lot of failure. And there's like, if there's one winner, it means like a lot of people have actually failed along the way.
Well, what's astonishing, and he's given quite a few commencement speeches because he's an articulate Swiss. Roger Federer pointed out that in his entire career, this is a man who won 20 Grand Slam titles, probably the most elegant tennis player in history. He only ever won 52.5% of the points he played.
Yeah, I know.
It's truly amazing that at the highest levels of sport, it is fractions. Yeah. I used to be a good tennis player, a good amateur tennis player. And routinely, I would make it in tournaments. I'd win a round or, and then I would probably win a third of the points and I could be beaten 6-love, 6-1.
Hmm.
Because to win a tennis game, you have to win 4 points.
Yeah.
And often, if you're only winning a third of the points, the other guy gets to 4 points well before you. And so you can be a really good player and just get annihilated. And so the margins of professional sport are incredibly close. Now you can bet on all of that.
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
amazing, what the new AI, new technologies actually deliver is, I think, is truly fascinating. What's possible. You can bet on the next serve. You can bet on the next pitch. And in fact, one of the things, there's a chapter in the book on the potentially corrupting nature of gambling to sportsmen and women, that I think it was the Cleveland Guardians, 2 of their pitchers were being paid $5,000 a time to throw a ball at a specific time. So rather than that, so that, because on the apps you can literally bet on what are called prop bets. You can bet on absolutely anything. The next service point, the next pitch, the next 1.5 minutes in a soccer game. I mean, it's and that can be that can be great fun if you're winning, but it's very easy chasing losses. So you've lost a lot of money, and then you try and win it back. And people can gamble. The most heartbreaking stories are the ones that I think are most appetite for this, and also most telling, is that someone could gamble within they're betting $50, $100, and they're doing okay over like a week, and suddenly they'll lose $3,000 in 15 minutes because they place a bet, they lost, they double down, they keep doubling down. It's like keep in roulette, just keeping going on black all the time. And we all know statistically over if you flip of a coin, which is obviously a better analogy statistically in terms of probabilistic expectations, is that if you flip a coin 1,000 times, it'll be pretty close to 500. But within that, there will occasionally be runs of 10, 12 going in the same direction. And if you're on the wrong side of that, you can lose your shit. And in some instances, houses and marriages of some of the people that I spoke to.
And so one of the things that you talk about in the book, and we should actually kind of start talking about this, is kind of how, and this is the part that's uncomfortable. Like, obviously, the innovation is good. The fact that people were, like, in theory, not at all opposed to gambling. I mean, like, people should have a right to do. The problem is, like, these kind of, like, what it does, one, to the industry, because you talk about, you just talked about basically the corruption of the industry, that is like the feedback, like, but the, and the human cost, the real human cost of actually that explosion in technology, alongside a bunch of policy, like policy decision and legal decision. And it's like, this is really the tension between the two for us. So the question I have for you is, the corruption of the industry, is it worse now, or did it not exist before the technology
No,
advancement?
there's always been. I mean, one of the most famous instances, and I apologize for I may get the year wrong for all of the baseball fanatics. I grew up playing cricket. I love baseball, but I think it was either the 1917 White Sox team or something around a lot over 100 years ago. They were banned for life from playing because they were gambling against themselves. They were throwing games. So baseball over 100 years ago, and in my memory, I remember a tennis player, an Austrian tennis player, who got banned for life for throwing a game or throwing matches. And the most famous one was the South African cricket captain, Hansie Cronje, got involved in a massive betting scandal and was throwing games. And after rugby, cricket is the biggest sport in South Africa. And this was after they'd been a pariah nation and were coming out, and their captain was throwing games. And, for tens of thousands of dollars in payoffs, which actually is not that much, but that's what he was being paid. So yes, so there's always been the corruption there. The problem now, and in fact, this is what the kind of softer part of this is, that where historically it would have been stopping your team winning by throwing a game, whereas now it can be every time you get up to 40 love on your serve a double fault. right? And at that point, if people can bet on these things, or you can throw individual points and not have to lose. It's like conceding, if you're a soccer player, conceding a corner in the last 5 minutes of a game. If you're a defender, sometimes you might look incompetent, but it's relatively easy to do. If you're a good basketball player, there will be over and unders on how many threes you'll shoot in a half or in a quarter. If you're really, really good at that, and you decide for an entire quarter, you'll miss every three you try. Very easy to do. And it just looks like, oh, he's just having an off quarter, right? It doesn't necessarily cost your team the game. And some of these bets aren't even to do with the results. They're to do with yellow cards in soccer. They're to do with how, serving double faults in a game, you can still go on and win. So the ability or the variety of ways you can cheat now, which undermines the integrity of the sport, and also cheat the better for those who are not in the know, is enormous now. Which
it's also, I assume, the financial stakes, right? Are
exactly. And the amounts of money that gambling rings can put in, a lot of this stuff is kept under wraps, because as I point out at one stage in the book, that I used to bet on golf quite a lot, again, because I love golf. I play it. And sometimes there's glitches that work in your favor. I was watching, for those who are interested in golf, there was the Waste Management, which has the loudest hole in golf, it's called. The 16th is in this cavern. You think of golf as being a genteel sport. Well, there are people throwing beer cans and stuff. There's a very chaotic atmosphere. And one of the bets that DraftKings had was how close to of the three golfers, usually in the early rounds, the first few rounds, there'll be three golfers, who's going to be closest to the pin, to the flag. And Billy Horschel, who's a good American golfer, I think ranked in the 20s in the world, he hit his shot 3 feet, which is rare on a par three, difficult par three. People get holes in one, they get close in there. But the odds didn't change on my app. So I went, he's going to be closest to the pin, because the odds on the other two players shooting inside 3 feet was very, very low.
But so what it means, though, it's like you're watching a game, but you're constantly thinking about the betting.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Because you're on your phone.
Yes.
Looking at this. So basically it consumes all your mind space.
Yes.
You're not even watching the game for the game anymore.
That's right. You're not enjoying it as much. And in fact, one of the things that saddened me most was that I was losing my joy of watching the sport, because I was spending so much. And I got out of it. I got out of it with relatively unscathed. I went to see a therapist, talk about the way that, the triggers. I mean, it's interesting, because I've been writing about addiction for a long time, and I'm looking at gambling and prediction markets, as you know, but also I'm quite happy to admit that I'm an addict to caffeine. And this is an addiction that everybody is socially acceptable. Yeah. Well, of course, if you don't have coffee in the morning, I get a headache, right? You get withdrawal, right? But that's an acceptable addiction. And it's like, I would say that gambling for a while and caffeine continually, I'm addicted to. I'm lucky. I like drinking alcohol, but I can go without it and no problem. I've never been addicted to nicotine. I've not been addicted to drugs, and not that I've tried many, but as a student, I tried a couple of things. And so I feel as though, what was a shock to me was that I think I can say I was truly addicted to sports gambling for a while, and getting off it was quite difficult, because it was all consuming. And then I started to speak to people whose lives were totally ruined by it. And I was like, I need to alert people, because this is the thing. Like, I'm a libertarian. Gambling, the interaction with sports, there are policing parts of it that need to happen to stop, but you can't stop, but to limit the chances for sports itself to be corrupted, and for those people at the margins to be given help when they really need it. So putting in freezes on credit card deposits, and now they actually don't allow credit card deposits. You still use debit cards or bank transfers, as you should be able to if you want to, but you need to build friction to the system, because the worst thing happens when people start chasing losses in minutes. And there are things that can be built into that. But the secondary reason is I have 2 sons, one who's a teenager and the other one nearly a teenager, is that in some locations, in some families, many families actually, it's in a way that we would never give a 12-year-old, vodka, right? Fathers and sons are often putting together parlay bets.
You have a story in there, actually.
The latest football. I mean, there are schools. there's a school, I won't name it because I actually can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a relatively well-known school in New Jersey. It's an expensive school. And at one time there's a guy, Max Rogers, who he's very Christian. He'd gone to Princeton. He wrestled at Princeton. He got sucked into gambling for a while, and then he got out of it. And he asked a question, and it was like 60% of the fathers and sons had gambled in the previous week together. Because as a father of a teenager, sometimes it's difficult to get through to your teenage son, and gambling provides an opportunity for fathers and sons to do something together. The problem is that, as the psychologists say, the dopamine is agnostic. It doesn't care whether you're getting it from a hit of vodka, sort of, cocaine, or from playing or from gambling. And it's like, I'm not trying to stop people having fun, but be aware that there is a small minority of teenage boys who are getting in trouble. And the fact that there are books being run in fraternities and money being lent, and often the parents will bail people out, and, but there are people who get into serious trouble with this. And so for parents should be aware, just it's like, have fun with your kids related to this. It's like there are ways of doing this in terms of, fantasy football leagues and having a bit of fun with it. That's fine. But do realize that for a small minority, they can get sucked in and it can ruin their lives. And that's what I've seen.
Let's try to put some numbers on this. So can you kind of actually talk a little bit about the growth in the industry?
You've always had people betting on horse races for, and on other sports people could phone through bets through to Atlantic City or in Nevada to Vegas. But with the advent of smartphones, with the overthrowing of the PASPA, which was banned sports betting in colleges and in professional leagues by the Supreme Court, overturned in 2018, you've gone from, a few tens of millions, maybe 20, 30, 40 million, into an industry which is now running into the tens of billions. And Kalshi, the newer prediction markets where you can build it, and this isn't just sports betting. And I think I read that they'd taken in over $1 billion in a couple of weeks. And it's hard. The numbers keep changing, but it's running into the, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. And as is always the case with government, there is a government competition here because they run their own lotteries, but they also like the tax take from this. So it's a bit, there any area where there is an issue of addiction, be it alcohol, smoking, or anything, the products are taxed highly, and governments become addicted to the revenue. And so the policies are being developed. And one of the points I make in the book is that England, Sweden, and other countries, Australia, have been dealing with this issue for longer, and we should learn from those countries. Also, one of the amazing things about America, one of the reasons we moved, we might have known it at the time, I certainly don't think I appreciate it at the time, is the federal system, is federalism, is the fact that different states will take different approaches. And I think right now we are in learning as to what's the best combination, if you like, what's the best practice for government.
Because you say that there are 30, if I remember, 38 states that allow
yes.
sport betting.
There are some places like Utah which probably will never legalize it because of the Mormon population, amongst others. It's like but yes, there are increasing numbers, and the
District of Columbia.
Yes.
And so the difficulty, and this is where it's really hard, is that you want to allow betting. And like everything else, I assume that the 80-20 rule, which is like 20% of people do 80% of the betting, is that true?
It's not far off. Yes. As a rough
like something like this. And most of these people are actually totally fine, right? For them, it's like
absolutely.
It's a fun game. So the question is, how do you preserve that freedom and that ability for people to do what they will do one way or another, because it's like, right? And while kind of putting friction and protection for those for whom this becomes a real problem.
And as I say, and one of the great things about capitalism is there are feedback loops. So people complained. There's legislation in place, federal legislation in place, and companies like FanDuel and DraftKings have brought more friction in. They started off accepting, you could use any credit card to make a deposit. You could reload multiple times. Now they're limiting that, and none of them now take credit card bets. So you have to have money in your account. So you can't bet on debit. Well, you could go and get a bank loan and then use that, lie about, but you can't use a credit card to go into debt gambling now, basically. Whereas that was possible until I think a year ago. So
is that a private? Basically,
yes.
the companies.
Yes, the companies, the platforms. The Kalshis, the Poly Market, but in the sports bet, the largest two are FanDuel and DraftKings. MGM and Caesars, because of their historic casinos, have also online, but they have historically been more of the kind of casino games online. So you can play slots, you can play roulette, you can play blackjack on your phone. And a lot of people do that, but I was most interested in the sports aspect of this. But all of that, all of those areas are growing. So building in friction, so don't take credit cards. If someone's trying to reload from their debit card for the third time in the last 2 hours, maybe take a pause. They often will send through, I know to people who are still gambling a lot, they often, if you've bet a lot in the last 6 to 8 hours, you'll get emails and you'll get screenshots say, maybe it's time to take a pause, and these are the companies arguing against their short run interest, but they've realized that the pressure for legislation is coming and that they should act as good, as if you like, good stewards of the products, because they want people to keep betting. But at the same time, the image is bad, and bankruptcy is not exactly a good advertisement for their products. So whatever the reason, you can say that it's just the pressure, and it's nothing to do with their own good sense. But whatever the reasons, they are responding. Having said that, I think that this is where charities and maybe government action can come in. And it's hard to argue for more money for mental health, given that I know I was reading a statistic the other day, and I probably shouldn't say it, but that there's an astonishing number of people who are going to graduate school in some places that say they're disabled.
Yeah.
I think the reason is because they get longer to take tests, they get special dispensation. Once you create an incentive structure, people will take advantage of it.
Well, I think there's this statistic, and I think we heard like at Stanford and
yes,
places,
Stanford was the one.
Especially elite school, it's like 40%. I think
it's something trillion states. So whenever I'm always nervous, or not nervous, I'm always concerned, because I know how the game can be played and how people can game the system. But for those people who are most at risk of this, I can afford to go and see a therapist. When I actually wanted to go and talk to someone other than family members about, I never thought I could get addicted to something like sports gambling. I have the money to be able to go and see a therapist. Most people, or not a lot of people, probably can't. And secondly, you need a network of people, and sometimes family can do it, sometimes they can't, to help you cut yourself off from gambling. So you need feedback loops, you need support networks. And so that's the key part, is allow gambling to stay open, allow people to do this, work out the rules so that you don't drive it offshore. You put the tax rates too high, it'll just make it encourages people to push this off to Curacao and elsewhere, and Aruba and other places overseas. But we do need funding put aside for those people who are most at risk. And how to do that is a question for better economists than me, people who actually understand the way that the government support systems work, or how charities work. I don't have a clue. I don't have an answer for that. But mental health support is important for those people who are really at risk, whatever type of addiction it is, because these people need help. I needed help. Speaking to people was enough for me. I had a loving family, and I was lucky enough to be wealthy enough to lose a few $1,000s. But there are people who are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars and go into bankruptcy and lose houses. One of my friends who I occasionally play golf with is a real estate agent, and he does at least 2 to 3 forced sales every year due to gambling debts. So a house has to be sold, because otherwise they can't pay off there. And this is just he's a really nice guy, but he's a real estate agent in suburban Philadelphia. And this is happening all over the country. And so for those people, the minority, the single digit percentages who create a lot of the profit for these companies, we need to help them. whilst allowing this to remain legal and not. Senator Blumenthal is pushing through some very aggressive legislation, which I think will drive things offshore and not necessarily be helpful. But, it's got support from the kind of ardent left wing of the Democratic Party. It's obviously not going anywhere in the next 2 years, but I see down the road there could be quite stringent legislation put in place. And I'm basically arguing against that, but at the same time understanding that there are people who get really harmed with this. And unlike the people who probably get addicted to crack cocaine, although it can come from people who go to Ivy Leagues, the people who are getting in trouble gambling are often, relatively wealthy kids from middle-class families who can go 3,000 into debt and suddenly they're 300,000 in debt. And then they owe money to the very wrong people, and it can get very ugly very quickly. So, that's what we want to. That's what we're never going to avoid it completely. But I'm just, the reason for me writing the book, in one sense, was to alert parents of boys, just watch what your kid's doing, because, if they have access to your credit cards to buy a soccer ball or a baseball bat, they can also probably use it to spend money on gambling sites, and suddenly your credit card bill suddenly goes up, and you did not credit card bill necessarily, your debit card. And that's actually one of the good things, because I think that had happened, the credit card issue, and that stops it. Age verification on the net, as you know, is fraught with difficulty, and we don't want to make it so onerous. But there's one really successful guy that I interview in the book who is still not 21, who's like $600,000 up, but he's the rarity. Nearly everybody else lost money.
Yeah. You have a comparative section in there of different policies implemented in different countries. Which one are your, who do you think is, which country, which state, which is doing the best work?
I think that there are good things from lots of different locations. I think that the UK and Sweden have built in some friction and have greater mental health support. So they would be the two that I would immediately go to. They're far from perfect. You've got quite stringent restrictions in Massachusetts. Pennsylvania, where I am, just has the highest tax rate and allows pretty much anything else to go. And again, I have no objection to nudge people in the right direction. Nudging was all the rage, a few years ago. One of the reasons we tax alcohol high is to discourage its use. The problem with it, as stated earlier, is that the states then become reliant on the revenue, and then it's actually hard to change policy because you have so many vested interests that are associated with that revenue generation. So,
see, if the incentive within government were such that they can actually design good policies, you would think that this would be a place where they would, precisely because this is one of those places where they have an incentive for it to continue while avoiding
yes.
the worst problems. But unfortunately, the incentive within governments are just rarely geared towards.
Yes.
But it's good to hear that some countries are doing things well.
Yeah, well, I think that it's one of the things are far from perfect. But what you don't want to do is, as I say, is to provide no cover for those people who have mental health issues, which I think addiction is certainly part of.
You were in the book, you contrast Nevada and Singapore. Can you talk about this? I thought that was really interesting.
I'm blanking now.
And it's like the opposite extreme shared lessons, where you said, Nevada just puts it all there. Basically, like the Nevadas, they're betting on they're putting policies, I think, to gear individuals towards, where Singapore is does it in a more collective way. I think they tax upfront.
Yes, I mean there are different ways of doing it, and to be honest, I wrote some of those sections a long time ago, and things have moved on, and I'm not sure, and that's it's both a mixture of not being an expert in tax policy, not being an expert in the regulation of these things, and also the fast moving nature is that it's a mixture of lack of knowledge and also hopefully humility, that I'm really not sure what the best policies are. But I can say that letting this play out through federalism. Let's find out. And
Yeah.
we might gravitate towards one solution. It
Trial
might
and
be New
error.
Jersey. Trial and error. As Will Dasky said, trial and error is better than trial without error, which is
Yeah.
what I think a lot of these people want to do. They just want to ban stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that will just drive it offshore. Or what was happening before 2018, people were still betting on sports, but they were doing it illegally. And they, you win a fabulous bet and you don't get the money, but the money's offshore in Bermuda or wherever. And it's like, you can't get it. Now
Yeah.
you can sue DraftKings or FanDuel if they don't follow through. And as I point out in the book, the glitch that I took advantage of when it wasn't cheating, because it wasn't like the ball was in the hole, but the odds should have shifted. It's a bit like, what do they call it? Shrinkage in the retail trade. Stuff being stolen from CVS and Walgreens all the time. They just accept that there's going to be a level of theft. There is going to be a level of times where the companies screw up, but they'll suck it up. They'll suck up the losses because they're trying to be both good corporate citizens and they don't want the advertisement. So as is usual, capitalism is providing the solutions, and the AI that works to make you can have prop bets on every single serve in a tennis match also are there, that the algorithms can be there to spot dangerous behavior on a voter, on a bettor, and make things better for the and limit the ability of someone to harm themselves. So AI can work both ways. It can create the market, but it can also create friction when there are problems. And I think the companies will move in that direction because they don't need really draconian legislation that puts them out of business.
It was just very interesting. It's a great book. I recommend it. The House Always Wins. And it is really challenging because you highlight something that is real, that is a problem, that is also goes kind of, there are a lot of people who are concerned about the state of boys in this country,
Yes.
and this is
Yeah.
not helping. This is not helping. But then at the same time, you don't want to, drive everything underground and ban it, because there's just a lot of they're like the vast majority of people actually can bet without having problem. But I read this and I was like, poor Roger. Like, so now you don't bet now. Like I read on your Substack, you may have stopped actually watching soccer.
Well, that was
and I was just like, this poor Roger. This is
I tell you what I do now. I still participate in brackets. So I participated in a World Cup bracket. I participate in one with our neighbors and my family for the European Championship football in England or across Europe. So I do that, but it's like, for me, gambling's okay as long as I do it socially with friends.
Mm-hmm.
$10 here, let's all put some money in. It's when it's when you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of dollars on a phone sometimes in the middle of the night. It's like, it's like drinking. It's like if you're drinking, and we both like to have a drink. It's like drinking a gin and tonic before dinner and then having a glass of wine with dinner. No problem. Drinking whiskey at 2 a.m. on your own. That's where it starts being.
I had my most epic drunk episode with you, I would say.
Well, I remember. That's not.
I rarely get drunk. They rarely, because I just don't like it. But I was going on a date.
I know.
And I had a gin and tonic at the Mayflower before going on that date. And I stood up and I was like, oh. And then I thought in my drunkenness that if I ran, the alcohol would get out of me, which only got me vomiting on the sidewalk before.
Oh boy.
Yeah. and they've ruined the Mayflower, by the way.
They have.
It had this fabulous bar before.
Yes.
They were too generous with gin, but they had this fabulous bar, and now it's just this sterile kind of, you feeling like you're like in the lobby of the hotel.
We used to go there a lot. It is a shame.
It is really sad. Okay, I want to take 5-10 minutes to talk about the Fauci thing, because you are, after all, the head of the Center for Global Health Accountability.
Right.
And COVID, there was a lot of lack of accountability.
Yes.
And some of it is coming out now, but I just want to kind of I want you to kind of comment a little bit on what you think is happening with Fauci. What happened? Like I was having dinner with friends last night, and this one friend said, I'm really upset about how everyone is dragging Fauci to the mud. For me, Fauci was the hero of the AIDS epidemics. He's gay, and he's at the time, it's scarred, the gay community at the time, because they lost a lot of friends.
Absolutely.
And this was not my time to kind of make a speech. And so, but I was thinking, he may have been great there, even though actually I heard it was actually pretty crappy, but he may have been great there, and still it doesn't make it okay the way COVID was handled, right? So, but you're the expert. So
there are people who are far more expert than me when it comes to some of the details within the diary and what went on. There are people whose careers were completely destroyed. I mean, I lost my job, but it wasn't related to Anthony Fauci. So there are people more expert, but I have followed what's going on and still follow closely the fallout from this. And I'll get back to Fauci in a second, just so that you know, although the United States has left the World Health Organization, the World Health Organization is negotiating and has largely agreed a pandemic agreement, which, even if the United States is the one nation out of the 193 that are still members that is not actively participating, we will have to comply with the rules if this comes into law internationally when you go to other countries or when you trade with other countries. So what's going on at the WHO still matters. There are negotiations ongoing. They're up to the 7th or 8th negotiations for the pathogen sharing part of this. It's like if you want Indonesia or Namibia or whoever it may be to send you viral samples if something scary happens, they want guarantees about being able to get vaccines. It's all quite dirty politics taking place. But the European Union, the kind of Fauci-like organizations, are just plowing ahead with no real assessment of what went wrong, what went right, what went wrong. Because so they're doubling down, basically saying, in effect, assuming that they got everything right. So the biggest issue for me is not Anthony Fauci himself, although he is the poster child for a lot of the things that went wrong. It's the fact that we haven't had real assessments of what went right and what went wrong, because so many things went wrong. The closing of schools, the example we mentioned Sweden earlier when it came to gambling. Sweden was the country that followed closest to the protocols that are in place. Every country had a pandemic plan in place, although weak. They weren't paid much attention to in 2019, but every country had one in place. Britain had one, France had one, the US had one. All of them were pretty similar to what Sweden actually did. Sweden was the only country that followed through. It said, protect the most vulnerable, isolate where warranted, don't shut schools, don't shut businesses, protect the most vulnerable. Now, obviously, there's certain diseases, there's certain types of infections where they would affect children more, and in that case, but COVID, it became pretty obvious by at least April 2020, if not earlier, that this was really only affecting people with comorbidities and the old. That didn't mean it wasn't being taken seriously, and obviously other younger people did die. But at that point, we should have known that, the policy should have changed. They should have been more like Sweden, which never shut a school for a single day. And so you would think that we would want to learn from what Sweden got right and maybe go back to our own playbook that was in place, which was, basically do what Sweden did. Sweden didn't get everything right. They admit that, but they got more right than any other nation, I would say, on earth. And
the same
yet
way
there
as
is no
Florida.
reflection.
There's no reflection.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. There's no reflection. There are these reviews. Baroness Hallett in the UK, there's a £250 million review. And they're asking all the wrong questions because they don't want to see what they got wrong. They're not asking the fundamental questions like, did our policies save lives? And so, however many millions of people died from COVID, but I would say the impact of COVID policies was as dramatically bad or worse than the disease itself. And Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins of the NIH, as well as other parts of the federal government, deserve a lot of the blame. I remember watching Fauci at the time and believed him in 2020. I did not know what was going on behind the scenes, unlike some very courageous people who were digging a long time ago. As someone who's an international health person, I'm watching what's going on now, which is but I wrote about Fauci because I couldn't believe how different the public persona was from the private diaries. And private diaries were, this is probably, it could well be a lab leak. The vaccines won't be as successful as we think. They won't prevent transmission. Masks probably won't work very well. Meanwhile, all of the public statements were the complete opposite. And that level of hypocrisy needs to be called out. So I don't want him being hounded to death, but there is probably a case to be answered. And it's more a question of not about Anthony Fauci, but realizing what we got wrong. Otherwise, we will repeat it. There are labs around the world that are doing the research that probably will lead to another coronavirus or other virus to come out. And our policies they're kind of the pandemic industrial complex. I have nothing against vaccines. I have nothing against the pharmaceutical industry. But when you set it up that they're going to get subsidized to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars to produce vaccines, you know what's going to happen. They're going to produce vaccines.
Yeah.
Especially
without liability, right?
Yes, exactly. So it's not that parts of the pandemic preparedness don't make sense. They absolutely do. But that they shouldn't be the overriding issue. And we should assess what we got wrong, because we got many things wrong. And without assessing that, you will just repeat the failures.
Yeah. The thing that was kind of crazy is that actually I remember very, very clearly at the beginning of the pandemic, Fauci with someone else actually wrote a paper, academic paper, and then there was a write-up, I think, in the Wall Street Journal, unless they maybe have actually wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed based on their studies that actually showed what the mortality rate was for COVID. And it was actually more correct than what they came out to say afterwards. Yes. And that was at the beginning. And then we knew
there were so many things that were done wrong. And, I don't want to go too much into it because I'm actually running out of time. I got to run. But there were lots of things that the mortality rate was never as high as it was originally predicted, because if you're taking as your samples the people who are already hospitalized, then obviously the fatality rate is going to be much higher. And that was a fundamental biostatistics error that was known even by me at the time. I'm saying, but unless you've actually gone and seen how many people in the population that you're drawing from this hospital are actively non-symptomatic with the disease, you don't know what the fatality rate is. If like 3% of the people who are hospitalized are dying, that sounds scary. But if 99% of the people with the disease are not in hospital, then that's a 0.03 fatality rate. And I think a lot of that was willful. That's what we're finding out. A lot of people were prepared to go, if these are mistakes being made, then I'll go along with it. It's like they did the best they could at the time. Well, I think what we know is that they knew a lot more and they liked the power. And that's why we need to hold people to account, because otherwise this will happen again.
Well, thanks. On this note, I agree. I mean, the House always wins. And also, I think we've heard Roger said that he will rename his podcast, his Substack, to something.
Just whatever Veronique wants. I will come up with
really
have.
I don't have an idea, but I mean, otherwise, just go and follow the Roger Bate Substack. You will not regret it, really. And Roger, as always,
thank you.
Awesome seeing you.
Great to see you.